Richard woke to the faint buzz of his alarm, as he did every weekday. After 15 years of marriage to Helen, mornings had settled into a rhythm so steady that he could practically map out each minute. He would slide out of bed with a small groan, shuffle to the bathroom, and return to find Helen rising from the sheets, stretching and yawning with a tired smile. Together, they'd exchange quick greetings, then go about the business of getting ready for another day. He brewed coffee while she tidied the bedroom, and they would reconvene in the kitchen for a quiet breakfast. Although neither complained out loud, both sensed the routine, so familiar, had begun to feel bland. They were both in their late 30s. Helen, a school teacher with an eye for bright accessories, had a knack for turning plain outfits into something stylish with a scarf or a clever choice of earrings. She had dark hair just past her shoulders and a friendly, open manner. Richard, a software engineer of average height and build, wore his hair short and, in his own words, didn't bother with fashion. A collared shirt and neutral trousers were his usual uniform. He and Helen had loved each other a long time, but their relationship had settled into a state of calm. There was nothing overtly wrong, no big fights or hidden resentments, yet a sense of stagnation lingered in the corners of their everyday life. One Sunday morning, Helen was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her favorite herbal tea, tablet in hand. She scrolled through an article about ways to bring excitement back into a steady marriage. Most of the suggestions were what she'd seen before: plan a vacation, book a surprise dinner at a fancy restaurant, experiment with new hobbies together. But she paused at one paragraph. It described the idea of looking at each other in new lights, sometimes by switching up roles, even outfits. She read the lines over twice. It was nothing explicit, just the idea that trying something out of character could reintroduce fun and spontaneity. The approach resonated with her, at least enough to plant a seed of an idea. Later that evening, Helen and Richard were curled up in their usual spots on the living room sofa. Helen flicking through a magazine, Richard checking sports news on his phone. The television murmured in the background. Finally, Helen set aside the magazine and glanced at her husband. "Richard, can we talk about something maybe a little odd?" He locked his phone and turned toward her. A slight look of concern passed over his face, though he tried to sound casual. "Of course." She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "You know how we've been in a bit of a rut. I read something earlier that got me thinking." He nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "I'm listening." She took a calming breath. "What if we tried? Well, it sounds goofy when I say it out loud, but the article was about changing up routines, and one suggestion was, for couples, to swap clothes. Not necessarily out in public or anything, but just in private, trying on each other's style." Richard let out a cautious laugh. "You mean I'd wear your dresses and you'd wear my shirts?" Helen's cheeks warmed. "I guess so. At least you'd try mine. I already wear your big shirts sometimes, so it's not so strange for me. But it might be fun to see how we'd feel seeing each other differently. The article said it can bring you closer, maybe generate some laughter, help us see each other from a new angle." He let the notion sit for a moment. "I never thought of that," he admitted. "You mean like a mini fashion show?" Helen gave a small smile. "Yes, sort of." A heavier pause followed. The idea itself was innocent, but the deeper implications, how it might affect Richard's sense of comfort, hovered in the air. He cleared his throat. "Well, I'm willing to give it a try, if you think it might be worth it. I don't want to promise I won't feel ridiculous, but I'm open to it." Helen's shoulders relaxed as relief washed over her face. "We can keep it light. If you hate it, we'll never do it again." "Deal," Richard replied, smiling. A sense of anticipation mixed with nerves trailed them for the rest of the evening. The following weekend, Helen suggested they give the experiment a go. "No point in putting it off," she said that Saturday morning, standing in their bedroom as sunlight spilled through the curtains. She rummaged through her side of the closet, pulling out items with a thoughtful expression. Richard hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, a touch of unease clouding his eyes. "Remember," she told him gently, "it's just us. Nobody else will see." He exhaled. "Right, let's do it." Helen first tossed him a long-sleeved blouse and a knee-length skirt. Both were plain enough that she hoped he'd be comfortable. He tugged off his t-shirt and slipped the blouse on, fumbling with the buttons. The fabric felt thin and smooth against his chest, unfamiliar in every way. Once he pulled the skirt up over his boxers, he exhaled with a short laugh. His reflection in the bedroom mirror was surprising, to say the least. The blouse fit snugly at his shoulders, but it was wearable. The skirt, with its zipper on the side, rested around his waist and reached his calves. Helen couldn't stifle a giggle. She moved forward and straightened the blouse's collar. "See? It's not that bad, is it? I look like, well, I don't know who," he said, turning left and right in front of the mirror. "It's an odd feeling." Helen placed her palms on his shoulders. "Do you feel okay, though?" He considered the question and let out a slow breath. "Yes. I feel strange, but not in a bad way." Helen grinned, stepping back to admire him. It was both silly and oddly sweet. His posture was stiff, and he kept tugging at the edges of the skirt. When he turned around, she noticed the back was slightly too tight. "Let's find something else," she suggested. "I have a dress that might fit better around your shoulders." "Sure," Richard said, the tension in his voice warring with a flicker of curiosity. She dug out a simple black wrap dress. "This is stretchy. It might fit more comfortably." Richard changed out of the skirt and blouse and stepped into the dress, carefully tying the wrap around his waist. When he turned toward Helen, her smile widened. "Surprisingly, this fits you better." He swallowed. "It feels different, soft." Helen was pleased to see his guarded expression starting to change into something resembling cautious intrigue. "Want to try shoes?" she teased. He looked down at his feet with a skeptical laugh. "I doubt I could get them on, or even walk in them without tripping." "Okay, no shoes, but we can add a little makeup if you want." She said it with a hint of hesitation, not wanting to push him too fast. Richard took a moment to consider. Finally he shrugged. "If we're going to do this, might as well see where it goes. But don't go crazy, just do something small." So Helen guided him to the dresser where she kept her makeup. She stood behind him as he sat on the bed. First she brushed a bit of foundation along his cheeks, explaining what she was doing in a calming tone. Then she applied a little blush, just enough that he could see a difference. Once she was done, she stepped back, eyeing him with a grin that revealed her own surprise. "Wow," she said gently. "You look, well, to be honest, you look kind of nice." Richard turned to the mirror again, studying himself from a new perspective. He couldn't deny that he looked like a different person. There was a certain thrill in seeing the slight shift in color on his cheeks, the shape of his face altered by the cut of the dress. Helen's eyes sparkled. "It's definitely unusual, but I sort of like seeing this side of you." He felt his throat tighten at her words. He wasn't sure how to respond, but he gave a small nod. In that moment, something he couldn't quite name flickered inside him. He was surprised to find he didn't want to rip off the dress. It felt comforting. He wasn't used to describing clothing that way. Usually he bought purely for utility. Does it fit? Is it comfortable? Fine, done. Now, the physical sensation of the fabrics made him pay closer attention to how he moved and how the material lay against him. Helen placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can stop if you want," she said, her voice gentle. He took a breath. "No, I'm okay. Maybe we can just hang out like this for a few minutes?" Her face brightened. "Of course." So they sat on the edge of the bed, talking quietly. At first, they just giggled about how weird it all was. Helen teased him about how unsteady his gait might be if he tried to walk in her heels. Richard, in turn, poked fun at how he'd never quite appreciated how complex a wrap dress was, always assuming you just put it on like a coat. Over the next half hour, the laughter eased into more intimate conversation. Helen found herself confessing that, for a while, she'd felt anxious about their routine. "I was afraid if I brought it up, it would seem like I was blaming you, or that I wasn't happy," she said softly. Richard shook his head, the soft folds of the dress shifting around him. "I've been thinking the same thing too, wondering if we got too predictable." Helen reached for his hand. "This is definitely not predictable." He laughed. "No, definitely not." They spent the rest of the afternoon relaxing at home. Every now and then, Helen would glance at Richard in her dress, and a small smile would appear on her face. It felt as if the act itself, odd as it was, breathed some fresh air into their dynamic. By dinner time, Richard carefully put his own clothes back on, carefully folding the dress before returning it to the closet. For the next few days, they joked about the experience, but let it settle in their memories as a curious weekend adventure. Then, 2 weeks later, on a quiet Friday night, Helen caught Richard staring thoughtfully at the black dress in the closet. "You okay?" she asked, stepping beside him. He blinked, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. "I was just remembering how it felt." Helen touched his shoulder. "It wasn't too weird, was it?" "No," he murmured. "I actually liked it more than I expected." She tilted her head, studying him. "Is that something you'd want to try again?" He hesitated, pressing his lips together. "I think so, if that's all right with you." She placed a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Of course. I'm the one who suggested it, remember?" That evening they repeated the process. Helen suggested he try a different combination, a loose blouse and a pair of flowy pants she sometimes wore for casual outings. As he studied himself in the mirror, he felt an unexpected sense of comfort, as if the new outfit gave him permission to let go of certain self-imposed boundaries. Helen tried not to stare too much, but she couldn't hide her fascination. The pattern continued over the next few weeks. Sometimes on weekend afternoons, Helen would rummage in her closet, searching for items that might fit. They would laugh over how some pieces were too snug, while others draped on him awkwardly. A few, though, fit well enough that he found them genuinely comfortable. Helen occasionally added a bit of mascara and lipstick, though lightly, and each time they'd sit and talk, or watch a movie, or do small household tasks while Richard wore the clothes. The casualness of it all soothed any initial embarrassment. One day, Richard found himself suggesting they go a step further. "Helen, I know this is going to sound silly, but do you think we could maybe pick out something new for me? Something of my own?" She paused, considering him. "You mean you want to buy clothes made for women, in your size?" He cleared his throat, fiddling with the edge of his shirt. "I think so. Just maybe 1 or 2 outfits. We could go online if going to a store is too nerve-wracking. I don't want anyone we know to see us." Helen saw that hint of worry in his eyes. "I understand." She gave him a reassuring smile. "Sure, let's do some online browsing. I can help you figure out sizing, and we can pick something that might fit well." So they spent an evening scrolling through websites. Helen showed him how to measure his waist, hips, and chest accurately so they could pick the correct sizes. She found herself enjoying the role of style advisor, pointing out different cuts and fabrics. Richard, though initially tense, began to relax once he realized how many styles there were, some more androgynous, others more distinctly feminine. They ended up ordering a few simple items: a pair of jeans cut for a woman's figure, a cotton top, and a knee-length dress with a relaxed fit. Once he'd placed the order, Richard felt a mix of anxious excitement. "If I don't like them, we can just return them, right?" he asked. Helen gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Of course. There's no harm in trying." When the package arrived a week later, Richard felt a flutter in his stomach as he pulled the cardboard box into their bedroom. Helen was right behind him, equally curious. He opened it slowly, lifting out the items one by one. "Which should I try first?" he asked, sounding almost boyish in his eagerness. "Let's start with the jeans and the top," Helen suggested. "We'll see how the fit goes." He stepped into the bathroom, changed, then emerged. The jeans were snug, but not uncomfortably so, tapering around his calves. The top was a soft gray cotton with a slight scoop neck that left a bit more of his collar visible than he was used to. Helen circled around him, studying the fit. "It looks pretty good," she admitted. "Do you like how it feels?" Richard ran a hand over the fabric of the jeans, marveling at how they hugged his legs. He nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, they're all right. Different, but I can move fine in them." Helen grinned. "Let's see the dress." With a slightly sheepish chuckle, he went back into the bathroom. Moments later, he reappeared wearing the knee-length dress. Helen's eyes lit up with a mixture of amusement and admiration. The dress had short sleeves and a subtle pattern. It wasn't too tight, yet it highlighted the shape of his torso in a way she had never quite seen before. "Wow," she said softly. "That suits you more than I expected." He swallowed, his nerves returning. "It feels nice. I don't know if I'd wear it anywhere else, though." Helen watched him brush his palms down the front of the dress, smoothing out wrinkles. He looked at himself in the bedroom mirror, turning slightly from side to side. She realized that beneath the humor, he was genuinely appreciating how the clothes transformed him. Over the next weeks, as these private moments became more frequent, they encountered an unexpected new reality. The experiment they'd started as a novelty had begun to mean something deeper to Richard. He would linger in front of the bedroom mirror a bit longer each time, studying not just the clothes, but the reflection of himself in them. And the more Helen encouraged him, the more he seemed to grow comfortable with these garments. Sometimes, he'd even incorporate a touch of makeup on his own, just a bit of blush or eyeliner, before Helen even stepped into the room. Yet, while this new side of Richard enthralled Helen, she also noticed a slight shift in their dynamic. He was growing more adventurous, more willing to explore the different ways he could express himself. She was proud that he felt open enough to do that. But a tiny part of her wondered, did he realize how much of her initial playfulness had changed into something else? Was she as enthusiastic as she'd been at first? Or was she starting to feel uneasy about how far he might go with this? It came to a head one evening when Helen arrived home from work to find Richard in the living room wearing the casual cotton dress they'd bought. He had even painted his nails a light shade of pink. She was taken aback, having expected him to wait until they were both settled and had a plan for the evening. "Oh," she said in surprise, setting down her bag. He immediately glanced up, worry crossing his face. "Hey, I'm sorry. After work I felt like changing into something more comfortable. I didn't think it would be a big deal." She forced a supportive smile, hoping to quell the pinch of unease in her chest. No, it's fine. You usually wait for me." Richard studied her expression, taking a step closer. "Do you not like it?" Helen looked at him, the caring husband she'd known for so many years, now in a simple but distinctly feminine dress, with painted nails to match. "I do like seeing you comfortable," she said honestly. I guess I'm just realizing how normal this is becoming for you." He bit his lip. "I can change if it bothers you." She shook her head, reaching out to touch his wrist. "No, don't do that. I said it's okay, and I mean it. It's just an adjustment for me, too. This used to be something fun and new, and now—" He searched her face. "We can talk about it. I don't want to go too fast." She sighed, letting her hand rest in his. "Let's change out of our work clothes. Well, I'll change out of my work clothes, and then maybe we can chat a bit?" Richard nodded gratefully. A few minutes later, Helen emerged from the bedroom in a t-shirt and comfortable pants. They settled on the couch together. Helen tucked one leg under herself and faced him directly. "I'm proud that you've embraced this side of yourself. You seem genuinely happier when you're in these clothes, like you're more at ease," she began. "But I also realize it's quite different from what I imagined our little fun experiment would lead to." He nodded slowly. "I never saw this coming either. Believe me, if you'd told me months ago that I'd own my own dresses, I would have laughed." Helen smiled at the memory of how nervous he'd been the first time. "I guess I just need to know you still see me too, that I'm not just the enabler or the closet you're borrowing from." His eyes widened. "Helen, of course I see you. This all started because you wanted us to connect, and, weirdly enough, I do feel more connected to you, even if it doesn't seem that way. You gave me this space to explore, but I don't want you to feel like I'm forgetting you." She let out a breath, relieved at his reassurance. "I guess I just needed to hear that." He reached out and put his arm around her. "I know we have to navigate this carefully. If I'm ever making you uncomfortable, please tell me." Helen relaxed against him. "Okay, I will." From that conversation, they found more balance. Richard was mindful not to spring surprises on her. He tried to involve Helen in his excitement, asking her for makeup tips, for instance. She, in turn, acknowledged that his newfound hobby brought him joy, and she tried to approach it with the curiosity she'd originally felt. Though the initial thrill of novelty had evolved, they still carved out moments for gentle exploration. A month after that talk, Helen floated another idea one Saturday morning, an undercurrent of nervousness in her voice. "Richard, I was thinking, maybe we could take a short weekend trip, just the two of us, somewhere not too far, but far enough that we have a bit of anonymity." He raised his brows, setting aside the mug of coffee he'd been holding. "That sounds nice. A break from work would do us both good." She nodded, her tone quiet. "And maybe, if you want, you could bring some of the clothes you feel comfortable in. We could go out, not anywhere fancy, maybe just a walk or a casual dinner, with you dressed how you like." Richard looked stunned. "You mean me wearing something more feminine in public?" She toyed with the rim of her cup, a mix of anticipation and concern in her eyes. "Only if you want to. I'm not pushing you, but if you've been feeling comfortable at home, maybe it's the next step. And where we're going, nobody will recognize us. It might be a chance to see how you feel in a place where you won't have to worry about running into friends or coworkers." He swallowed, heart pounding at the thought. That's a big step. Helen reached across the table to take his hand. "It is. Think about it. We don't have to make any decisions today." Richard did think about it all week. He wavered between excitement and dread, worrying about how strangers might react. But the idea of being in a different town, where anonymity was easier, calmed some of those fears. Eventually, he approached Helen with an uncertain smile. "Let's do it. Let's go. And I'll bring a couple of outfits. If I lose my nerve, I can always wear my usual stuff." Helen gave him an affectionate kiss. "All right, I'll book the place." They selected a cozy bed and breakfast in a small town about 2 hours away. The morning they set off, Helen drove, while Richard alternated between looking out the window and fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. Occasionally, she placed a reassuring hand on his thigh, reminding him that they were in this together. They arrived around noon, checked into their room, a comfortable space with warm lighting and a plush double bed, and decided to grab lunch at a nearby cafe. Richard dressed in his standard jeans and shirt, not ready to go out in anything else. Over sandwiches, they discussed which local spots they might visit: a park by the waterfront, a small collection of boutiques, and a well-reviewed restaurant for dinner. Helen saw Richard's hesitation each time the idea of dressing differently came up, so she let him steer the pace. Around late afternoon, as the sun began to dip, they decided to stroll by the waterfront park. Helen gently asked, "Would you like to try your other outfit tonight, or would you rather wait?" Richard drew a breath, scanning the walkway where a few out-of-towners took photos of the water. "Let's go back to the room, and I'll see how I feel once I'm dressed. If it's too much, I'll change again." "All right," she agreed. Back in their room, Richard stared at the knee-length dress he'd brought. It was simple, in a soft material with short sleeves. He laid it on the bed, heart racing. Helen stood by, arms folded gently across her chest, giving him space. Finally, he picked it up. "I guess this is it." She nodded. "Take your time." He stepped into the bathroom, changed, and stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the wrinkles. Then he applied a modest touch of makeup, some foundation, a dab of concealer, and a bit of mascara. He tucked his short hair behind his ears, reminding himself he could still pass by unnoticed if he acted natural. After a minute of steady breathing, he emerged. Helen beamed, though a nervous flicker crossed her eyes. She took his hand. "You look good," she murmured. "We'll just walk, see how it feels. If you're uncomfortable, we can come right back." Richard exhaled slowly. "Okay." They made their way outside, hearts beating a little faster than usual. For the first few minutes, Richard was tense, hyper-aware of every glance from a passerby. He avoided eye contact, kept his chin lowered, and stuck close to Helen. Nobody seemed to pay them much attention. People were busy with their own errands or chatting with friends. A cool breeze brushed over Richard's legs, something he'd never experienced wearing pants. It was both strange and oddly soothing. Helen looped her arm through his. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded, swallowing. "Yeah, a bit nervous, but I'm not panicking." They strolled down the main street toward the waterfront. They passed a few shops displaying local art. Helen suggested they dip inside one to have a look. Richard nodded in agreement, but as they entered, he felt a renewed wave of self-consciousness, sure that the woman behind the counter was examining him. He tried to focus on a display of pottery, feeling Helen's comforting presence at his side. He glanced around. If there were any stares, they were subtle. When the shopkeeper greeted them politely, Helen responded with a casual smile, and soon they were chatting briefly about the handmade mugs near the windows. The tension in Richard's shoulders eased by a fraction. Back on the street, the sun hung low in the sky, painting the storefronts with a golden glow. They walked past a cafe and ended up at a small bench near the water. Richard let out a tremulous laugh. "What's funny?" Helen asked, sitting beside him. He leaned back, gazing across the rippling surface of the lake. "I'm doing this. I'm actually out here, dressed like this, sitting in public." Helen lightly bumped his shoulder. "And nobody's run over screaming. The world didn't end." He smiled, allowing himself to feel a glimmer of relief. "Yeah, I don't know how to explain it. Like a rush, mixed with calm, if that makes sense." Helen placed her head on his shoulder. "I think I understand, and I'm proud of you." They sat quietly for a few minutes, enjoying each other's presence. Eventually, they decided to head back to the bed and breakfast before dinner. Helen asked if he wanted to keep the dress on for their evening out. He pursed his lips, thinking, "I'm not sure if I'm ready for a whole restaurant experience yet," he admitted. "This was nice, though." She nodded, respecting his decision. "Then let's do something simple for dinner. We can just grab takeout and bring it to our room." He smiled gratefully. "I like that idea." That evening, after retrieving dinner, they relaxed in their room, chatting about the day's experiences. Richard eventually changed into his pajamas, but the weight of what he'd done lingered in a positive way. Helen could see it in his posture, a sense of contentment, a new dimension in how he carried himself. Their trip ended on a warm note. By the time they drove home, they had shared many small conversations about what this might mean for their relationship going forward. Helen stressed that she was there for him, even if it sometimes felt odd for her. Richard told her he never wanted her to feel overshadowed or taken for granted. They recognized they would need more conversations, and likely more compromises, to keep the marriage balanced. Returning to their everyday life, they re-entered routines that felt slightly different now. On weekdays, Richard stuck to his usual attire for work, but in the evenings, he sometimes dressed in the new clothes he'd bought or borrowed from Helen's closet. Some nights, Helen would help him with his makeup, and they'd sit together watching a movie, occasionally chatting about how they both felt. There were challenges. One Sunday, they were invited to a friend's barbecue, and Richard grew quiet and withdrawn beforehand. Helen sensed his frustration. He'd grown fond of wearing more fluid outfits, but he didn't feel comfortable sharing that side of himself with friends just yet. She offered a consoling presence, reminding him that it was okay to keep certain things private. In the end, he wore his regular jeans and shirt, but he couldn't fully shake the complicated emotions swirling within. Afterward, Helen noticed he seemed subdued. She brought it up that night. "I know it's tough," she said gently. "You've come to enjoy expressing yourself differently, and at the same time, you worry about other people's reactions." He sighed, lying on his back on the sofa. "I just feel like I'm living two versions of me. The one who always followed the expected path, and the one who's discovered something else. But I'm not sure how to meld them together." Helen nodded. "No need to rush. We're still working through this ourselves. Take it in steps." Over time, they found small ways to integrate Richard's new preferences into daily life without causing too much upheaval. He experimented with subtle choices, like wearing a more form-fitting shirt or underwear typically made for women under his usual work attire. At home, he continued to wear dresses, skirts, or blouses whenever he felt like it. Helen was largely supportive, though they had the occasional disagreement when she felt he was prioritizing his wardrobe over quality time with her. In those moments, they made an effort to sit down and talk, reaffirming that their relationship needed both partners' emotional connection. One of the biggest hurdles came when Helen's sister, Nicole, decided to visit for a long weekend. Nicole was close to Helen's age and had a strong personality that often filled a room. Helen and Richard had debated whether to say anything about his new exploration. Helen suggested that it might be best to keep it under wraps unless he felt comfortable explaining. Richard, however, felt conflicted. When Nicole arrived, the house was bustling. She brought her dog, a lively terrier, and the chatter in the living room was constant. For the first day, Richard stuck to his usual clothes, but he felt awkward. He was used to switching into dresses in the evening, yet he couldn't just do so with Nicole around, not without a conversation. On the second night, after dinner, Nicole was sipping tea in the kitchen with Helen, and Richard hovered nearby. Nicole looked around, noticing the hush in the air. "You two seem... I don't know. Something's off. Are you fighting?" she asked, half joking. Helen shook her head. No, we're not fighting. We've just been going through some changes." Richard cleared his throat, deciding to speak. "Nicole, can we share something with you?" Helen turned to him in surprise, though she didn't object. Nicole raised an eyebrow. "Sure, I'm all ears." Richard explained, voice shaking slightly, that over the past few months he'd started wearing clothes typically labeled for women, partly because Helen had initially suggested trying something out of the ordinary, and it opened up a new experience for him. Nicole listened intently, her gaze flicking back and forth between them. When he finished, she took a slow sip of tea. "Well, that's unexpected," she said finally. "But are you happy with it?" Richard paused, glancing at Helen. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Yes, I think I am," he said. "It feels right for me, and Helen's been supportive. It might sound odd, but it's become part of our life." Nicole set her mug down. "I appreciate you telling me. I can't say I've encountered this in my circle of friends, but if it works for you, who am I to judge?" Helen smiled in relief. "Thanks, Nicole. I know it's different from what you're used to, but we didn't want to hide it the whole weekend. That would have felt weird." Nicole offered a small grin. "I get it. I might need time to wrap my head around it, but I'm not going to freak out. Just promise me you won't try to put me in your clothes, Richard." Richard laughed, some of the tension draining from his shoulders. "I won't." They spent the rest of the evening chatting about lighter topics, and while Nicole occasionally gave Richard a curious look, she didn't seem negatively judgmental. The next morning, he ventured to wear a pair of women's jeans and a sweater that Helen had purchased for him. Nicole noticed, but she only offered a neutral smile and kept the conversation flowing as usual. Once Nicole's visit ended, Richard and Helen breathed a collective sigh of relief. They realized that sharing the information with a trusted family member felt like a significant step forward in feeling comfortable. It reminded them that they had the right to shape their life together in ways that worked for both of them, as long as they communicated openly. Weeks turned into months. Their routines were still there: work, dinners, weekends spent cleaning or watching a show. But their bond had gained a new dimension. Sometimes, Helen would remind Richard that she needed a bit of ordinary date night, meaning she wanted to go out with the husband she recognized from all those years before, in the shirt and trousers that had been part of their history. He understood her completely and respected those moments. They would dine at a neighborhood bistro or meet friends for a casual evening, with Richard dressed in his typical manner. Later, at home, if he felt a yearning to slip into a comfortable top from Helen's side of the closet, she would smile and walk over to him, maybe adjust the neckline and say, "There, now you look ready for a relaxing night in." On other occasions, they would talk about bigger plans for their future, traveling to a different country, possibly moving to a more vibrant city where they might find others who understood this type of lifestyle. But for the time being, they were content to keep their circle small and their experiences private. Their 15th wedding anniversary rolled around one evening in late autumn. Helen booked a cozy table at a local restaurant, and they dressed to the nines. Richard wore his usual suit, and Helen donned a long emerald green gown. Over dinner, they reminisced about the ups and downs of their years together, jobs gained and lost, the house they'd bought, the silly arguments over paint colors, the times of tears and laughter. And eventually, their conversation led them to the chapter of this cross-dressing journey. "You remember when I first brought up the idea? I was so nervous you'd think I was poking fun at you or that I was being foolish," Helen said, resting her chin on her hand. Richard chuckled, leaning forward. "I do. I thought you'd lost your mind. I never imagined it would lead us here." She smiled, eyes glistening with warmth. "It opened up a whole new aspect for us, and while it hasn't been the easiest thing to navigate, it's definitely been interesting." He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm grateful we took that chance. It wasn't just about clothes. I think it reminded us that we should never stop exploring and learning about each other. Helen's chest tightened with affection as she laced her fingers with his. 15 years, she said softly. I'm ready for more. Richard nodded, giving her a smile that spoke of a bond still strong, perhaps stronger than ever. Me too. After dinner, they returned home, changed into comfortable clothes, and snuggled on the couch. The anniversary had them feeling sentimental, so they dug out old photo albums to laugh at their younger selves. Looking at their wedding pictures, Helen commented on how innocent they looked back then, unaware of where life would take them. Richard slid an arm around her waist, pulling her close. I still see the same woman, he told her. You're as vibrant now as you were then. She blushed a little, leaning into him. You've become more than I ever expected, she said quietly. Thank you for supporting me, especially in this part of our life. It's not exactly typical, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his presence fill her. We'll keep figuring it out, she whispered. That night, they stayed up late talking about their dreams for the next 15 years. They discussed children briefly, though they recognized it might not be in their timeline anymore. Life had taken them on a slightly different path, and they were open to what came next, whatever that might be. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them, and they fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, the weight of routine balanced by the spark of something fresh that had found its way into their marriage. In the weeks that followed, they continued to blend their daily life with Richard's interest in crossdressing. There were occasional jokes about him stealing Helen's favorite top, or Helen playfully lamenting that his feet would never fit in her shoes. They also discovered new ways to laugh together, reminding each other to stay flexible and honest. Helen sometimes found herself explaining their situation to certain close friends who noticed subtle changes in Richard's style. Reactions varied from friendly acceptance to mild bewilderment. Occasionally, Richard heard a snide remark from a casual acquaintance, but he tried to let it roll off his back. The unwavering encouragement he received at home gave him the confidence to remain authentic. Over time, they found an equilibrium. Helen realized that while she no longer had the same initial thrill of experimentation, she wasn't rummaging through the closet for him each weekend anymore. She had gained a husband who was more in touch with his own sense of ease. He was calmer, more willing to share his feelings, more thoughtful about their shared life. She could see it in how he spoke to her about every aspect of their marriage, not just the clothes he wore. Though outside observers might not grasp the significance, they understood it in the privacy of their home. In their comfortable living room, the place where the world felt less critical, they kept discovering nuances in each other that they had overlooked during their years of routine. The clothing had, in some unexpected sense, become a channel for closeness, laughter, and candid conversations. One quiet evening, Helen found Richard sorting through laundry, picking out a pair of his jeans from a pile that included some of her clothes. She stood by the door, watching him carefully fold a blouse. He noticed her gaze and offered a half smile. I was just thinking about how I used to tease you for mixing whites and colors, he said, holding up the blouse. Now I'm folding clothes that, well, I never thought would be mine. She walked over, taking the blouse from his hands. I never pictured that either, she replied softly, but I wouldn't trade where we are now. He set the jeans aside, turning to her. Really? Helen reached up to touch his cheek, noticing the faint shadows of worry there. I wouldn't ask for a different marriage or a different husband. You're still you, and that's who I love. Relief flickered in his eyes. He bowed his head slightly to kiss the top of her hand. Thank you. They finished the laundry together, a small, ordinary act that carried a newfound significance. Afterward, they made dinner side by side. While washing vegetables, they chatted about their day. Helen recounted a challenging moment with one of her students, while Richard mused about a coding bug he and his team had finally managed to fix. The conversation flowed easily, underpinned by a gentle hum of mutual respect and gratitude. Some nights, Richard wore a simple dress around the house as they cooked or watched a show. Other times he wore his usual t-shirt and sweatpants, especially if Helen seemed to be craving a bit of the old, familiar comfort. Their marriage had become a tapestry woven from all these different threads, the new ones resting gently alongside the old. In the end, the closeness they achieved wasn't flashy. It wasn't built on big proclamations or dramatic moments. Rather, it was forged through quiet acceptance of each other's needs and a willingness to keep lines of communication open, even when the topic felt strange or uncomfortable. The outward appearance of their marriage didn't shift drastically. To neighbors and acquaintances, they were still Richard and Helen, the couple who had been together forever. But inside their home, they understood each other on a deeper level. And so, their life moved forward, day by day, year by year, carrying the echoes of that spark Helen lit the day she suggested something out of the ordinary. Though neither would have guessed it at the start, it turned out to be a pivot point in their relationship, a moment that reminded them that even after many years, you can still discover new sides of a person you thought you knew completely. Their story was not a sweeping fairy tale. It was two people finding ways to grow together, staying mindful that a marriage thrives when both partners decide over and over to open their hearts a little wider. And within that openness, something unexpected, like a pair of jeans or a dress, could bring them closer than they had ever been before.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.